My guest today is Scott. So Scott, thanks so much for being willing to share your story. And
yeah, happy to chat.
Absolutely. And would you mind starting by just sharing a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I'm Scott. I've been born and raised in Maryland, a little south of Baltimore, east of Washington, D.C. I actually live in the house that I grew up in. This is my childhood bedroom, and now it's my home office. So I grew up here in Maryland. I married my high school sweetheart. We now have 3 kids, a 5-year-old, a 2-year-old, and a 3-month-old. And they keep us real busy.
That's awesome. All right, so what's your faith background then?
Sure. So I was baptized into the Presbyterian Church. And I, grew up going to church every week, but things were really boring. And to give an idea of the kind of atmosphere that we had at that church, when we would go to visit my cousins in North Carolina who were Baptist, and they kept on saying the name Jesus, it made me really uncomfortable, because in our church, Jesus was what you yelled after you hit your thumb with a hammer. It was almost like a deistic environment, very impersonal. And so I grew up involved there, did a lot of missions type work, building houses for Habitat for Humanity, doing youth group. And then as I got older, I learned more and more about Jesus from the Baptists, like my cousins and their friends, and realized that, there was a lot more to faith than this vague God figure, that God became man. He came here to save us. And that's when my faith kind of, came alive and became a lot more real, a lot more important to me. So, raised Presbyterian, the Baptists taught me about Jesus. And then, the Baptists also got me reading a lot, reading a lot of theology, being well-versed in my Bible. And then I got to about 30 years old and had this kind of realization that I knew basically nothing about the Catholic Church. Only what I'd been taught by Baptists, those strange papists and their Mary worship.
Yep.
And then I came across a few books by Jesuits and some work by the writer Elizabeth Bruenig. And like these people seem to really love Jesus, and they're nice, and they're not weird. So that got me reading from Catholic authors for the first time, and it got me involved in Catholic Twitter, where I found more people that were interesting and not weird and loved Jesus. And that just, having not known Catholics, this was a completely new experience to me. So I kept reading a lot of Pope Benedict XVI, some Father Thomas Joseph White, basically anything that I could get my hands on, and started talking to a young priest at the local parish, getting coffee with him about once a month and asking questions, talking theology. And it was another person where, he was smart and interesting and loved Jesus. So I came to get a better understanding of what it meant to be Catholic from Catholics and not from Baptists, which, those are two very different pictures of what the faith is.
Were there
And
some things that could you give any examples of things that you maybe assumed about Catholics that you found not to be true or different than what you expected?
I guess in my community growing up, I didn't know a whole lot of Catholics, and the ones that I didn't seem to be very serious about their faith. And in getting to know people that were serious about their faith was eye-opening. And then learning about the teachings of the Eucharist and how for more than a millennium, basically every Christian on the planet believed that we were consuming the body and the blood of Christ, as opposed to, almost an empty symbol in the churches that I'd gone to before, both Presbyterian and Baptist. And that was interesting, the history of it, and then going really in depth with John 6 and some of the other scriptures really opened my eyes and, made me think, maybe my church now has it wrong. This sounds a lot better. And learning about the doctrine of purgatory, less as a place one goes for punishment, and more of a process through which we're purged of our sins and made more into the image of God so that we can enter into his presence. That was a much more fulfilling, better teaching than I'd had before.
Awesome. Okay. Yeah. So you're talking to this priest and you're, meeting Catholics and being surprised. So what happened from there?
I continued to, get coffee with priests, get involved. Well, not involved, but talk to more people on Catholic Twitter and following different podcasts, like the Clerically Speaking guys were really big for me. And following Father Anthony on Twitter when he was still on Twitter, and just like, this guy is hilarious. He's young. He loves Jesus, and just seems like a dude that I want to hang out with. And that was so different from my mental image of old dour priests that I'd had in my head.
Awesome. So how long was that period then of just kind of maybe connecting and engaging with the community before you decided, hey, I'm going to maybe consider this for myself? Or maybe what was that process of kind of asking if you wanted to become Catholic?
So from the beginning of my, I guess, informal discernment process, when I started reading and, following different Catholics online, to when I believed that the Catholic Church was the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church, was relatively short, maybe like 6 months. And it was one of my first conversations with the local priest where, I said it out loud for the first time that, I think you guys are right about this, through tears. Wasn't planning to say that, but just realizing in his office that I believed it. So that was a short process. And then it was a longer process of, more formal discernment, being formed by the priest, preparing myself to have the conversation with my family, with my friends that are deeply involved in these evangelical circles and don't have favorable views of the church. That was really difficult. And then it was maybe a year after first admitting that I believed the church, until a year between that and my confirmation.
Gotcha. That's awesome that you were able to kind of, continue in obedience, even if it felt really hard. So what were did you feel like there was maybe, without going into too much detail about, individual reactions, did you find that the reactions were maybe positive or negative, or that, it was easier after that point or harder? And yeah.
The hardest talk and the hardest reaction was with my wife. Her family grew up Catholic, and she was baptized Catholic. And I think there was a lot of hurt in the family. There was a divorce, a lot of people falling away from the faith. And I think there was some resentment there, and just she wanted me to be anything but Catholic, So it was a hard conversation, and a year and a half later, it's still not easy. Being in a mixed church household, and what are we going to do for our kids? Some of my friends had much better reactions. They were a lot more curious about the hows and whys, and some of them were happy for me. Some were not. It's interesting. The former Catholics, my friends that grew up Catholic and kind of fell away, they had some of the most negative reactions. Like, why would you do that to yourself? So definitely varied reactions from different people.
Gotcha. All right. So so then when did you kind of begin? Did you go through RCIA, or did you kind of have a more unusual kind of entrance?
So I did not go through RCIA. By the time I had, a coffee with a local priest, I had read so much and learned so much that the priest said, "You probably know more about the Catholic faith than 98% of my parishioners." And then I continued to read and learn and pray, and the pastor at the parish, heard my story and heard about how much that I've been thinking about this and praying on this and learning that I wouldn't need to go through the full RCIA process.
Gotcha. So then when did you join the church?
So I joined in August of 2020.
Okay.
It was the priest that I've been talking with, learning with. It was his last weekend of at the parish.
Oh, okay.
And let's squeeze it in before I leave. So he got to serve as my sponsor and confirm me at Mass, which was very special for both of us.
That is really cool. What was it like being confirmed in the middle of the pandemic? Or I guess that was kind of like early middle, maybe.
It was hard because, you can't really go around and get congratulations and socialize with the rest of the parish. You're just all wearing masks, and basically people give you a thumbs up, and hard to build relationships at the parish level when, you're not supposed to talk to each other much.
Yeah, I remember like right in the middle of the pandemic, we had moved to a new town and we were going to a new parish, and definitely took a while to really connect. And I remember that Easter we had to like there were like two different rooms. You could either they had a limit for the number of people who could go in like the main sanctuary, and then there was like an overflow room, and we went like an hour early with our two kids, to, get a spot. Not that we wanted to take it from somebody else, but anyway, I remember like that was a very interesting time to be going to church for sure, and I'm sure an interesting time to be confirmed.
Definitely presented its challenges.
So, what's it like being Catholic then? Or how does it feel? And I'd be curious to hear some of the graces that feel you've experienced being a Catholic.
Well, how about it's great. I love it. I feel like I've learned so much, and that there are so many gifts of the church and so many traditions that bear a lot of fruit and keep me living for Christ. Learning about Ignatian spirituality and praying the examen, and having the office of the church and the readings. I feel like there's so much structure that you can walk into, which was really beneficial for me, and so different than how I'd been taught growing up, where just say what you feel when you feel like it, which I can still do that, but when I'm struggling to express, it's great to have the prayers of the church to help me along and constantly be pointing me back to God.
Yeah, it's like they really equip you, I think, to grow in your faith. Whereas as an evangelical or as a Protestant, you're kind of like, okay, like it's so personalized that it puts a lot of pressure on you, and it can be sometimes dependent upon emotion. So yeah, I definitely agree that it was very freeing when I didn't have to try to like conjure up emotion. It was more like I was, guided and given like a tool set of different prayers and spiritualities and kinds of things.
One of the conversations that I had after deciding to become Catholic was someone asking me, well, what if you change your mind again? You were Presbyterian, you went to the Baptist, you went to like this vague evangelical type of faith. What if you change your mind again? And I feel like I'm more Catholic now than I ever was a Presbyterian or an evangelical, that it takes more of my being and it affects more of my life. Like I feel like it takes and colors the entirety of my experience in a way that I didn't have before.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's really cool. So, kind of on that note, what advice would you have for someone who's maybe interested in becoming Catholic, or maybe maybe someone who says, why would I ever want to become Catholic instead of Baptist? What would you say to them?
It's difficult because I feel like most people wouldn't be too attracted to the kind of path that I took to the church, which involved like 75 books. A lot of people don't. A lot of people in my life just don't want to do that. And I guess I would recommend to them just the fullness of the faith and how the church consistently strives to be the church that Jesus founded and be a faith to be practiced as opposed to, most of the people that I was going to church with, they're going to church on a Sunday to go to a rock concert and a TED Talk. And then, you walk out and your faith life is kind of over until next Sunday morning. And, Sunday morning is really entertaining that way. But the rest of the week leaves a certain hollowness and lack of direction. So I think I would just say to people that the faith life that I have now is so much fuller and richer and more engaging, even if my Sunday morning experience, the music isn't as good. The sermons, the homilies, they're not always great. And that's okay, because Jesus is there and we get to receive him.
That's awesome. I heard someone else that I talked to on my channel. They pointed out that, everything that you appreciate about, evangelicalism, you can find in the Catholic Church. It might be a little bit different, but you can find it. Would you say that that's been your experience, that, everything that was positive from your previous upbringing, you can still bring it in and incorporate it, and maybe even already find it there as well?
I would agree with that. Like, I am really grateful for my time with the Baptists and just the evangelical movement that taught me to love the Bible, that taught me to love Jesus. And I get to bring all of that, and then I get to receive Jesus in the Eucharist. I get to constantly be inspired by the stories of the saints. I don't know why we didn't talk about the lives of the saints in my younger life. Like, these are shining beacons of faith, of a life for Jesus well lived. And, I think there's a real poverty within the evangelical movement where, it almost feels like history started when Billy Graham started his ministry. And, we as Christians get to be a part of something so much bigger and greater.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely know what you mean. I kind of feel like sometimes as an evangelical, my knowledge of church history was kind of like my knowledge of American history, where I know, like, oh yeah, George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, the last 5 or 6 presidents. And it's kind of like that with, as an evangelical, all the apostles, and like St. Augustine, or maybe I think I said St. Augustine because I'm from Florida before becoming Catholic.
Yeah. Yep.
Anyway, you kind of like know those like few guys, and then it's like Martin Luther, and then like that's history. And yeah, it's definitely surprising.
Yeah. Like
the gaps.
In the circles that I was running in, church history was basically like Acts of the Apostles, and then, let's just skip forward 1,500 years, and then we can talk about Martin Luther and John Calvin, and we'll celebrate Luther for the theses and breaking away from the godless papists. We'll just pass over all the dirty talk and anti-Semitism, and then we'll talk about John Calvin because he's more acceptable.
Yeah, definitely. You kind of, there's some interesting things there under the hood in terms of some more problematic sides of those kind of patrons of the Protestant movement. Do you have any favorite saints that you have really enjoyed learning about and maybe incorporating into your faith?
A couple. So I took the confirmation name from St. Thomas More.
Oh, cool.
And I was inspired by his steadfastness to the faith. And, you read some of his responses to Luther, and they'll make you blush, but they're also just brilliant. So I really appreciated his steadfastness when they were going to kill him, and they did. And then the story of Juan Diego and Our Lady of Guadalupe, it was just so beautiful that it made me cry.
I don't think I've ever actually read that, so I might have to check that out.
I recommend it.
Cool. Well, Scott, thank you so much for sharing your story. It's been really fun to chat, and I can't wait for others to hear your story.
Absolutely. Thank you, Megan.